Hello!
Hello, AOS fans!
It's the agents of Nightvault.
Oh, we haven't had that vintage round here for many a year.
Yeah, many years.
So yes, we are going back 4 years now, I think, to Nightvault.
Nightvault! We're not going to do the back in time joke again.
No.
This video is all about Nightvault. We're just going to talk a little bit about all the warbands, the release, the cards that came out, our fond memories and things about it all, and generally reminisce a bit.
So thank you to everybody who sent photos to help us pad out this video with your brilliant creations, which were wonderful in the Shadespire one. I'll be wonderful in this one too, no doubt. We're just going to go through the warbands, starting with the core box, I guess.
Yeah.
So in the core box, we had more Stormcast.
Hooray!
More Stormcast, which, you know, it's not the end of the world. I mean, I actually quite like, of all the Stormcast models, I think these are my favourite.
Yeah, they're not bad Stormcast
models.
models.
And I painted them silver. I painted them actually like my old Bretonians.
Yeah.
Which I quite like. Old Bretonians, not as annoying as old Etonians. And we had a 7-fighter warband in the core box as well. I would say our first, but it wasn't.
It wasn't the first, but it was the first in the starter box.
And it had a whole, well, there were several whole new mechanics in this, weren't there? Because there was the magic mechanic, the Curse Breakers bought, and the Thorns of the Briar Queen bought the push mechanic from Varclav, and the floating over stuff and being able to go through blocked hexes as well.
Yes. And we got the scatter mechanic in this game. We didn't have that in the original one. That came along in this because Magic did lots of stuff with scattering and things like that.
I'd forgotten that Magic was involved.
Yes. So so those first warbands, and we'll talk about the Stormcast first. Do you think Averon's?
I guess so. I mean, these have come close to actually being Nightvault breakers or Underworlds breakers because I think GW went in too hard and too heavy with the Magic because all three of them could cast, and it has, I think, possibly broken Magic for the rest of the game because you don't really see Magic now, and because basically if you put too much Magic in, the Curse Breakers, because they've got 3 casters, they're just better than everybody else.
Everybody else has that risk that you generally only have 1 caster, maybe a second, some kind of option or an upgrade, but these guys, they've got 3 and they're all quite tough. Yeah,
and there were some over the years there's been some terrifying Magic builds with the Curse Breakers. When we first played them, I thought they were bloody awful, because you just tore them to pieces with your Thorns every time in the core box. Because the Thorns had much more movement and they could get on objectives really easily, and the Curse Breakers...
we've both got supremacy, have we? I think I've got more chance of scoring that.
yeah, exactly, yes. But the Curse Breakers, I think, had the last laugh. Because they were better, although Thorns did have a resurgence in the Beastgrave era.
A little bit, but I think there were other warbands that then beat the Thorns out. For the Stormcast, though, they've always done the best at that elite setup, really leveraging Magic, and just they were broken for a long time.
I think they were the best of the Stormcast warbands across the board. And there were some, like you say, there were some, I say broken is perhaps a bit harsh, but there were some really, really strong builds for them over the time. We played a game where I played a Curse Breakers deck that was a Grand Clash winning deck, and it was just phenomenally good.
And they were a pain as well because they could sit quite far back. They could turtle cast. It was that curse again of the turtle cast, sitting back and scoring loads of glory without having to really get involved. And because both of Rastus and Amis, they could cast a spell which could score you glory and inspire them at the same time.
Yeah, they kind of had to change that so that you could only cast it once. Yeah, because at one point you could cast it multiple times and just
keep casting it. Bing, 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 and if you didn't inspire, then doing that. And I think Averon, he had to make a successful magic attack or something. I can't remember
something like that. Yeah, I think he had to hit somebody. And these guys just had to cast a spell. I think.
Yeah, they just had to cast a spell which they could do to basically empower themselves, make themselves harder, and it then inspired them at the same time. So they definitely got a bit of a runaway bonus to them in the early days of the game.
Yes, I remember when it came out, the empower mechanic, because it's then suddenly dodges were successes as well as shields. And then in an article they said that it counted as being on guard.
Oh, that
just caused absolute chaos.
And then they quickly went, no, we didn't mean it like that. No,
like absolute chaos.
And I mean, the paint job wise on those, they're still very nice models. They're very dynamic. They're nice and chunky and large, and they really give you a lot to experiment on with the cloaks and stuff like that. And there have been some phenomenal paint jobs.
Is it Volomir? I think if you find him on Instagram, his painting is phenomenal. But he painted them at the Grand Clash we went to, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But they were amazing, much better than mine.
And the Thorns, They had their own tricks up their sleeve. In the early days, Varklav could shove them all, and he could keep doing it. There was no limit. That has obviously since
they might
been
actually win the award for most nerfed warband.
That's Monarch.
Might say apart from the exception of Monarch, also in this season.
Yeah.
But they've had various nerfs. They've had I don't know if they've had very many cars taken away, but
there are a few.
Varklav has sort of.
He's been hit with a nerf hammer, the nerf bat several times. And the Queen, while she was the leader and oddly also a magic caster, which I think is one of the things that made her even better.
Yeah.
She was quite tough. She had range attacks. She was quite brutally strong, especially once inspired. And they all, when inspired, went to like 2 dodge as well.
She was very frightening when inspired.
Yeah, Varklav, you would just keep him in the backfield. He was there purely to shove all of your I can't remember what they're called now. I can't remember
chain
what they're called.
rasp.
The chain rasp, that's it. The chain rasp around.
Which included the Everhanged, which was one of my favourite Underworlds models.
Yes, it's very cool. Now we didn't paint these ones; they were painted for us by one of our patrons. So thank you very much for that.
I think that was Brandon.
It was, yes. All the way from Americas.
But the Everhanged was terrifying to the Stormcast because he got cleave.
Yeah.
Which was, I think, was that a new mechanic? No, it wasn't.
No, I don't think cleave was. I think it was. They did have the very first stages of ensnare. They had a few where you ignored dodge, but it wasn't called ensnare back then. Okay. So, I think the thing that really helped with these guys is that they had a relatively easy inspire mechanic, which was just stand next to somebody.
Yes.
And they inspired, and then they got to 2 dodge, and you can inspire multiple people with that with Varklav's push. And they were just quite scary to be. And of course, you had the Sepulchral Guard from season 1 was suddenly like they no one cared about Sepulchral Guard anymore because these guys were just the Sepulchral Guard on speed.
Basically, that classic meme.
It was, yeah.
of undead players.
Exactly.
Eyeing up the Briar Queen.
And whilst the Sepulchral Guard had the ability to bring people back and the Briar Queen didn't, it didn't matter so much because they had so much more manoeuvrability, so much more speed.
If you're not dead, don't need to be brought back.
Exactly. So that was the first 2 warbands that came. They were both sort of a bit overpowered, and I think GW realised after that there was more balance needed to be done.
Yes, definitely.
So next up was the Gits and the Eyes.
Ooh.
And this was still one of those double releases where you got 2 warbands in one go.
Back in the day.
Aye.
And I was really looking forward to the Eyes of the Nine. In fact, I was really looking forward to the Gits as well, but the Eyes of the Nine are probably my favouriteest warband, even though they're a steaming pile of doo-doo.
Now, the eyes were painted for us by one of our patrons, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Yep.
And they, I think in this season, probably win the title of most terriblest warband.
Not just this season, any season.
Possibly any.
I think they are the worst.
Them and Axes, I think, between them.
Yeah, they have the Blue Horror, who is... you could do some interesting things with the Blue Horror, because he did start off the board.
Yeah, he was summoned. So that was a whole new mechanic of summoning one of your fighters in.
But you had Narvia and Turosh, who were basically like... They'd failed the interview to get into the Khorne Warband, and they were, they tried out Siege instead.
It's one of the things you always forgot that they had range attacks as well. I forget they've got that. And they were just god awful. One of them forgot to put his shield on, so he had dodges. Yeah. The other one had remembered to put his shield on, so she got shields in defence.
Yeah, I think so. Though I seem to feel like it was the other way around. But anyway,
maybe it was. Maybe
I feel like it's Turosh who had shields. So long since I played them, but they were really hard to inspire because Kacharik had to be standing next to Vortimus, I think, when he cast a spell. Yeah, it's like, oh man,
or make a spell attack action. But either which one. Yeah. So he had to sit back and just wait for Vortimus to do something. Like, can you hurry up and do something?
And then when he did, he only had 1 shield, and he was absolute beast. If he could survive long enough, because again he had 3 wounds.
Punch him in the beak,
but he did get re-roll. He could re-roll.
Yeah, he could do a re-roll when he was once he was
pretty
inspired.
Cool. It was I think it's any failed attack does. I think
could be.
So he was pretty good. If you in very very narrow set of circumstances, Vortimus he had a couple of nice upgrades and ploys which were quite good for him. And so he could be dangerous, but more often than not, he was dead before he was dangerous.
Being just a gun tower to basically sort of sit back and blast people to pieces. But of course, anything he could do, Stormcast could do better. Yeah, because they all had magic in their situation, which always felt wrong to me that the Tzeentch Warband weren't better at magic.
Yeah, I mean there were some nifty tricks. They had a couple of things where you could swap fighters over on the board, and you could run supremacy with them. as long as you got it early enough.
Yes.
Otherwise, you didn't have enough fighters left.
The ability for the blue horror, when killed, to spawn into the brimstone horror and not relinquish glory as well was a whole new thing. That was like suddenly I've got to take 2 attack actions to kill this guy for 1 glory. What is this?
Yeah, there was a guy called Eric who made some really good builds, and you could do some really beastly things with the horror, because basically any upgrades and things carried on onto brimstone. So then, if you've got extra wounds on him, it was so difficult to take down. Yeah,
because suddenly instead of having this 2 wound and 1 wound fight, you had like a 4 wound and 3 wound fight. Like, I'm not getting any glory for this 4 wound kill.
No.
And then you started putting. There were the tombs in this season as well, which we'll talk about later. But
most people call them tomes.
Tomes, yes. Sorry.
But Pete always called them tombs, which is very funny.
Look, just because I'm dyslexic,
and that you call them smote.
And then we had the Gits, the largest warband
ever.
9 fighters. Our tiny brains were bent out of shape when we saw that there were 9 fighters, because we were like, there was only 7 starting hexes.
And so they had the nifty mechanic of when you, after you've placed everybody, you could place them adjacent to Drizgit.
Yeah.
Which was great. These again were painted by Brandon for us, so thank you very much, Brandon. And they also had a fanatic.
They did. I feel like Snurk, for me, could have been so much more chaotic than he was, and he actually turned into one of those broken fighters that people really abused in ways that I just don't feel like GW ever intended him to be.
I think he still has that problem.
Yeah, because he can inspire at any point on a whim, and when he's inspired, he gets 3 dodge, which makes him not something you want to try and bother wasting too much effort on, and he has the ability to scatter around and just do damage without you being able to stop it.
He had his own 2 glory surge.
Yes,
he can kill somebody with him.
Annihilation, was it, or something like that? Obliterated, yeah.
And he could hold objectives, which really didn't seem any...
And assist people in attacks.
So,
I feel like with him, they should have made it that when he's inspired, either he always moves at the beginning of each Gits activation or something, or you have to activate him first, or your opponent could choose to activate him instead or something, just to really make his movement absolutely erratic.
Bonkers, because I mean, you could even later on they had cards that could put him on guard.
I'm just never going to go near that guy. Or give him one that basically allows him to reroll defense, or gives him shields instead of dodges.
A lot of silliness went on.
They also had the scurry mechanic, which meant you could conga line a load of your Gits and then run loads of them in one go.
That was cool, that mechanic. They had the card mad scurry, where you had to have 5 move tokens, which was it was 2 glory. It was tempting to try and score, but really sometimes really hard, because keeping 5 alive wasn't always very easy.
No, and they were one of the first this season I think brought in the mechanic of people inspiring lots of different ways, because they inspired if you got so many glory, but the Squigs inspired if Drizgit was killed. And Snurk could just inspire whenever he liked.
Choose to inspire him.
Yeah.
I forgot to do that in one of my Grand Clash games, and he died.
Oh dear.
I was like, that was my nadir.
And everyone always forgets about Progdonetta, because he has the ability to stop your opponent rolling as many attack dice if he gets an attack in on them. So he was great at hobbling people as well. But overall, they were another one of those warbands had loads of shenanigans going that we hadn't seen ever before.
I think they're a perennial favourite, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, even now, back with Harrow Deep and Nether Maze and stuff, they had a card banned. Well, not banned, but restricted, because they had the one which, if you were standing on the most...
infestation.
Standing on all the objectives, which was very easy when there were no objectives at the start of the game.
Yeah.
And they just had so many tricks up their sleeve, so they were a fantastic warband to just do all manner of craziness with.
Yeah, and still are. We've just played the memory, and they're still really good fun.
Yes. Who was next up, Robin?
Well, I think, Pete, it was Mollog and the Godsword Hunt.
Possibly one of the most divisive warbands.
No, I think everybody thought Godsword Hunt were rubbish.
I'm of course talking about Mollog, especially in our neck of the woods anyway.
Yes, and our Patreon supporter Matt absolutely loves Mollog.
He loves Mollog. He's I think, Mollog fan number 1.
Mollog, I think, does take the prize for being most nerfed. I know I tried to give it to the Thorns earlier, but what was really funny is they messed up something on the card. From the outset, made it even better.
Yeah,
it was too good, because he could charge twice when inspired.
Once inspired, he could charge twice. When he was inspired, he could move, and then he could charge, which you couldn't do back then.
Back in that day, once you moved, but Monarch could outdo all that. And he had a range 2 attack, which was terrifying. He had 7 wounds.
Massive damage, he was just horrific to come up against. You just knew if you saw Mollog on the table, he was just going to be right in the middle, just batting people all over the place. Unless,
because people, like all these things, they abuse stuff.
Yep.
He had a brilliant and Grand Clash winning tome deck.
Yeah.
Because you could basically park the tomes on him, and he was very hard to kill. So basically, the tomes did various things. One of the things they did was, I think, there was an objective. If you had so many tomes, you score glory. But then I think one of them you could
basically activate them
and get glory.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite as bad as the relics, but it was definitely it won a Grand Clash, I believe. So it was a tough build. I played one of those in the Grand Clash we went to. I took the Godsword Hunt to the Grand Clash, and got absolutely mullered.
Yeah, we'll talk about them in a moment.
Yeah.
But Mollog, he really embodied that one fighter to rule them all kind of setup, which really caused problems for the game in Nightvault, I think, because Nightvault really became about running in and smashing people's faces in.
I think, and I think it's generally, the game has generally had a problem with polarising fighters like Mollog.
Yeah.
Now, there's a few more of them now, but Mollog did it best.
He did it first, he did it best.
And it's a shame because his compatriots were fab.
Yeah,
Bat-Squig, brilliant.
Stalagg-Squig,
who you didn't play, you placed him afterwards.
Yeah, and you could put him on an objective in your opponent's half. You could put him anywhere.
He couldn't move ever.
He couldn't move, yeah.
And the exploding mushroom.
Shroom-Squig.
Yeah, and just a brilliant supporting cast, just really fun. But then this absolute beast, slightly breaking the meta card, which I think as Pete said, he's massively divisive.
And if anybody wonders what we're talking about, that is basically if you ever have a card that's good on a 3-wound fighter that does 2 hammers, 2 damage, it's going to be amazing on a 7-wound fighter with like 3 hammers and 4 damage.
And they've had to do various things to him to make him work. I can't even remember what they've done now. It's so long since we played him. They've done various bits and pieces to quieten him down.
And they've generally moved to it. They've implemented large fighters, so a lot of the juicy cards can't go on large fighters to basically stop you from going all out on him and stuff. And
because you could get a couple of plus wound cards on him and great strength. And then, so he had 9 wounds.
And at one point there was like a card which meant you reduce damage caused by 1 or something. So he's like on 9 wounds, and it just became possible to try and take him on.
And there were 2 cards because he could move twice. There was a card which you could score, a surge card, and you could score if you move twice. Yeah. And then they
got 2 move tokens.
They restricted one of them and then reprinted another one, and reprinted one as something
literally
else.
A week later.
And so he could print glory at times as well.
Yeah. So he was a terrifying and very divisive character, I think, in the meta. And definitely not one of our favourites. These were again painted for us by one of our patrons. I think this is possibly the season that we painted the least of, and I'm not sure I painted a single model in this season, realising this.
I painted these. In fact, I didn't paint very many either. I don't know. I did paint these when it first came out, and then I painted Ultharis because Games Workshop sent me the contrast paints. But actually, Ed also painted them for us. These are the ones I painted, but Ed also painted them.
He did a winter theme version, didn't he? Yeah, and they were very nice too.
Yeah, mine are 4 seasons. So anyway, and the Godsword Hunt were painted brilliantly by possibly nerdy Rob, who you should totally check out on Instas. I mean, this was, what would I say, 4 years ago. He is just a brilliant painter, and these I think the start of his journey, and he's gone a lot further than I have in the time. Let's put it that way.
The colours, the scheme, the everything about it is fantastic, which is a shame because the Warband sucks.
But this Warband, I think, demonstrated Underworlds at its best. Because there was almost a kind of community effort to make the Godsword Hunt playable. Make the Godsworn great again. Yeah, but I don't like using that phrase, so we'll pretend we didn't. Not quite that. But not great again, just make the Godsworn great. All right. And yeah, so lots of people tried to do things with them, and they were basically 6 wet paper bags. They were. They had some fantastic mechanics because they inspired whenever they had a upgrade played on them. Yeah. Which was one of those problems that if you couldn't score any glory, you couldn't play any upgrades, you couldn't inspire anybody to make them a little bit better, you couldn't then do anything more effective to score more glory, so you ended up stalling at the start. But if you could possibly, with some items like Potion of Rage and things like that, you could suddenly... There were some option Potions of Rage. You could suddenly make them a bit better, but
they just... I think that GW did a good job of trying to balance them, but they just maybe overcompensated on the negative side a bit more.
They were just... Their baseline stats were just a bit... Or I think it was their defence. I think they basically... Most of them stayed at one dodge.
Yeah.
And they just... you charge in, and then you just... I mean, that was the one good thing about them, was just fire and forget. So you didn't worry about what happened to them. You basically, I've got to make this charge with this fighter now, and then he'll be dead in a minute, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. I took these to the Grand Clash, but GW did that thing that they were very fond of, and they restricted some cards. Or no, they released some new cards.
They released the Powers Unbound deck, a week or two before.
Yeah, and it messed me up completely. I put some untested cards in, which looked good, and I got the balance all wrong.
It didn't go well.
It went badly.
I don't remember. I took Scritch. I took Scritch to that from season 1, but they had some great mechanics. They had the oaths, the objectives, and things like that, which have come back with
the
Gnar
Spirit. But the Gnar Spirit's slightly better, of course.
Yeah, a little bit better.
But yes, basically they had a lot of the standard cards. I think they had Oath of Annihilation, Oath of Supremacy,
Oath of Conquest.
A lot of standard cards. You declared that you wanted to score it, and if you did, you got an extra glory for it, which was really nice. But because the warband was so bad, most of them were really hard to score.
Yeah. They were one of those warbands again which had a caster that didn't have a spell attack.
Yeah.
And was actually just better going around punching people in the face.
I don't think anybody ever... I don't think I ever used Tedra as a spellcaster.
No. So they were one of those... They were very thematic. They had some great models in there, but the warband themselves were just...
I still think they have some of the nicest models. I mean, having been quite anti them, maybe it's because it's just a beautiful paint job.
So the paint job helps.
Yeah,
paint job definitely helps. And
I don't really like Gnarl.
That's not Gnarl. That's Grawl. Sorry, bark.
But and Olo is great.
Olo.
They look great, but they didn't play great.
Yeah.
So that leaves 2 more warbands.
The last two.
The dwarves and the elves, so to speak.
Yeah, it is a bit.
The Sylvaneth and the whatever they're called, Caledon Overlords, which I think were a brand new or relatively brand new warband at the time.
Yes, they were fairly recent.
Armies, sorry, they obviously were a brand new warband.
Fairly
with
recent.
Their hot air balloons and what have you.
Yeah, they're sky pirate dwarves, basically.
Yeah, steampunk flying dwarves.
I think one of GW's first attempts in AOS to come up with new radical designs on the classic tropes and make it basically IPable.
Yeah, not a fan.
No. So
not a fan.
I think this season overall as well, but especially this last few releases of this season, I had zero interest in.
Right.
I didn't care about Space Pirates, Sky Dwarves. I didn't care about Sylvaneth. I didn't care about Mollog. I didn't really care about the Dark Oath.
I was really looking forward to the Sylvaneth. I really liked the Sylvaneth aesthetic. I wanted them to be a bit more Kurnoth huntery, which obviously would be overpowered. But so I was looking forward to those. Their play style. They're quite a complicated play style. Yeah, is quite defensive, and they were one of the first warbands to have multiple different reactions and fighters who did different things, and it did my tiny brain in.
Then they relied a lot on crits, because you had people like Galligan who, if he rolled crits, he would do damage back. You had Ilthari, who if she rolled crits, she would heal.
Yeah,
and they all inspired
by healing
or removing wounds. Even if they couldn't remove a wound, they would inspire. If they,
I found that a bit frustrating. It's kind of like, well, we haven't quite thought that through very well, so we've had to fudge it. But there are people who love them. John Grant bought them not a couple of weeks ago to the studio to play, and they are thematically nice. But
the models themselves aren't too bad now. Looking back at them, and I know with the paint job you did on these, you tried it all with contrast, and it works out really well. To be honest with the contrast, because it's got that organic sort of texture to them, which really works. The models aren't bad.
No.
And the warband overall, they're just a bit weak, I think, is their main problem.
They're a footnote in Underworld's history, really, aren't they? They're kind of forgotten. It's almost like they're just trees and you don't notice them.
They were never quite amazing enough to ever reach the upper echelons like some of the other warbands.
You played them, didn't you? Jay Clare, who's a very good Warhammer Underworlds player, but works for Games Workshop. You played him at the Grand Clash, didn't you?
Yes, with Scritch. Again, they just weren't a warband that really interested me. Talking about warbands that didn't really interest me, they're Sky Dwarves.
Oh, nice segue there.
Yeah.
I think we almost argued over who wasn't going to play these.
Yeah, they turned out to be one of those warbands that kind of looked a bit rubbish and were actually a bit too good.
They were really strong. Yeah, I actually played them at the Grand Clash, and
I remember you coming to talk to me about it after the game.
playing them because it was with these guys, and they had a couple of really good cards in the Powers Unbound.
Yeah.
And so I'd had a bad day anyway, and
because you turned up.
Yeah, this guy, the defining thing for me of Thunderx Profiteers is that they basically score glory whatever you did. I've shot something, I've scored a glory. Yeah. Oh, I missed something, I've scored a glory.
Oh, I rolled a crit when I tried to hit you, I scored a glory.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
They all had ranged attacks. Some of them had quite good ranged attacks. He had knockback. One of them had the special ability where he had the upgrade that Iron Hail, if he fired, you could then fire again. Yeah. Thundrick himself was a beast. He had 2 shields, 4 wounds. He had the range 2 hammer, 2 damage attack. And he had that ability after he activated, he turned all the hexes around him, lethal hexes and stuff as well.
Yeah.
And they had a dwarf with a blimp on his back, which could fly around, and he was quite fast. So
he was nasty. Actually, he often didn't do much, but he was just a bit terrifying because he could be good.
He could be anywhere. Yeah. He had a range to attack. He could move 4. He could fly. Yeah. He's just all those things that dwarves shouldn't be. I mean, they were slow. The rest of them were only like 2 moves.
But they didn't. They could just set up relatively near the back. Yeah. And just you couldn't do much about them. They were a beast, but I've just found them really boring.
They were one of those warbands. It was just like, I'm going to plod forwards, slowly shooting you to pieces and scoring loads of glory.
Well, you didn't even need to plod forward.
Yeah, it's true.
You should just stand still because you've got to come to me.
Yeah. These guys with the Fearsome Fortress deck now could be quite fearsome.
Yeah. Maybe I'll get her out.
Hey, wiped you off the ball again, you loser. So that was basically it for me with them. I wasn't interested in the models. They're not bad models, and there's some fantastic paint jobs out there, but space, sky, pirate, dwarf things, they just weren't really it for me.
No, I have to say, beyond Tolkien, I don't think dwarves don't do much for me. No. Anyway, and I think any trial they don't really reimagine very well.
No, not very often, really, to be honest, because they're kind of a bit stuck in the setup they've got. Yeah. So I think overall this season is possibly one that really uninspired me, to steal a phrase from the game itself. There was only a couple of warbands that I vaguely liked, the Gits and the Thorns. Most of the others are actively quite disliked. Tzeentch, Mollog, Ilthari, the Dwarves.
That's interesting. But they had a good card pool, and it's a bit overpowered now. Yeah. But they had a good card pool, which did make it fun. So we did get to do things like through a lethal hex.
Oh, through a lethal hex. Well, I didn't move through a lethal hex.
So possibly the defining card of the era was Calculated Risk.
Did like go Calculated Risk.
Score a glory for running through a lethal hex, effectively.
Basically, yeah. Take a win from lethal, get a glory.
Get a glory, and that was so you could do. These guys could do it. Thunderx inspired by if they scored an objective, then Thunderx himself could then choose to inspire something. So you could run through a lethal hex, and then you get to inspire something. Yeah. Then they had things like warning shot, where if they missed, they got to inspire somebody, and it was just dirty and disgusting.
There were cards that in the universal pool. There was the one where you had to make a successful attack with cleave. Yeah. I can't remember what it was called now, but it was a comment below.
Critical hit, critical shot.
Might have been something like that.
I can't remember.
And cleave obviously was great because lots of people were rolling shields.
Headshot. Wasn't it headshot?
That was a different one. I think that was rolling if you rolled a crit when you were rolling to attack.
That's what I was thinking of, sorry.
But there was another one which is if you made a successful attack with cleave, then you could score
yes.
Again, they had lots of cleave on their attacks and stuff as well. So
is there ever going to be a card that was more fun than Potion of Rage?
Potion of Rage.
A
portion of rage.
So you popped it on somebody, and then when they charged, they could use it as a reaction. Yeah. And they basically got 2 extra dice.
Yeah. I realised that another thing that came in the Nightvault season was lethal hexes.
Yes.
Had those before.
No, we didn't have lethal.
They weren't placeable at this point. They were just fixed on the board. Of course,
there's one here.
Yeah, there you go. And of course, the Thorns didn't care about lethal hexes. They could just float straight over top of them. So it immediately became a thing that was much more in the Thorns' favour.
There was definitely a period where the Thorns were one of the reasons Thorns were so OP was because they didn't take damage in lethal hexes.
Yes, and there was a card, a board deck that got released that had like a patch of 3 lethal hexes, so you could offset them and they would just be lethal hexes everywhere.
Didn't they have to FAQ it that you couldn't place a lethal hex next to another lethal hex?
Yes, they did.
I think they did,
But I don't
think basically block it all off.
That didn't come out in Nightvault because you couldn't place it. Or could you place lethal hex in Nightvault? Possibly. And I think you're right.
No, you're right.
You had to.
No, I think you're right, yeah.
Oh, was it? No, I can't remember.
No.
Maybe.
Wow.
This is how long ago it was.
Yeah.
But when you could, they then almost immediately errated it to say, no, you can't put that lethal hex next to another lethal hex because
I think that came in Beastgrave. I think it was
could have been. It could have been
of Beastgrave. I think.
Thank you very much. And of course, there were several cards again that got completely blocked, completely banned.
One of my favourite cards of the game has now been banned.
Yeah.
And again, it came down, I think, to bad FAQing.
Yeah, terribly wording it. So they
had keep them guessing.
Yes.
Which was, particularly if you played Gits, was a brilliant card. And when I went to the Grand Clash in Beastgrave season, they errated it, so I couldn't play it. They banned it. But basically, keep them guessing was you had to make 4 different actions.
I think the idea of it was to encourage you to have to go on guard, have to make a move, or smash some models, to basically stop you from just going charge.
Yeah, or reward different players, I suppose. And it was great, but then they FAQ'd it so that you could do it if it was an action, and then it ended up being reactions could do it too. So it became like you could almost score it turn 1 with Gits because you could. I can't remember what you could do, but you could do a scurry, and that would count because it was
there was shenanigans there that basically meant that people could do it because Vortimus's summon became a thing that would work or something. So it became this thing where you could score it after very little effort. Yeah.
Which was frustrating, so they banned it basically. But they guessed because they FAQ'd it to say that I think there was reactions on cards. So Vortimus's thing was okay because that was an action, and it clearly stated it was an action, and that was fine. But then the scurry was a reaction, and and that was daft.
And of course, cards like Ready for Action would enable you to make an attack after a move, so then that started to count as well, and it just got silly after a very short period of time.
It absolutely did. Another card they completely ballsed up in the FAQ was Extreme Flank.
I loved that card.
That was such a nice card. Basically, you had to have a fighter on each of the edge hexes on a board.
Yeah, but people started saying, well, what happens if your boards are offset? Can you have them on the 2 nearest sides? And GW base said, yeah. And then they went, oh, it's rubbish. No, you can't use that card.
Yeah, and rather than saying no,
they have to be on the same board.
They have to be on the 2 furthest the 2 furthest edges away.
And there's many ways that they could have fixed it, and they just went, no, we're going to make it too good, and then we're going to ban it. Yeah, you're like, oh, come on.
But that was a fun card.
They also had lots of potions, along with the tomes in this. They had the potions.
The potion of rage.
Potion of rage.
Which already mentioned.
And there weren't many other potions that people actually used, but there was the potion of swiftness, which meant you could take off your move token, so that you could then move again. It might have been, or something like that. Potion of fastness.
I don't know. I can't remember what they were called. Grace.
It could have been, potion of grace, things like that. I mean, the season itself came up with loads of must-haves that some have been reprinted since in later packs.
Well, it was telling when we did our research for this that the cards that have been reprinted in the Essentials deck, which are effectively still available for Championship, are pretty much, not quite, but pretty much all hot cards.
All the must-haves.
All the must-haves. So they're the ones that go, the hot cards on Underworlds DB, basically the ones that appear in tournament decks more often than not, and they're all there.
There were things like branching fates, where if you had to get a different symbol on each dice that you rolled. So if you rolled 3 dice, you had to get like sword, hammer, and crit or something like that, and you just scored it. And there was no way of your opponent stopping that.
No, and it was sometimes could be incredibly frustrating, especially if you played the Godsword Hunt and a Grand Clash. But there are ways and means to manipulate it and get it out. There were some fun cards. There was the Martyred Strong Start combo.
Combine that one with Calculated Risk, and I'm going to run through a lethal hex, and then run through another lethal hex, and I'm going to die, and I'm going to score both objectives.
Yeah, there was a really daft, again, there was another daft ruling.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you sit and think, surely you can't, because I can't remember the whole argument behind it now, and then we had come up with what we thought was going to be the answer, was, you couldn't do that with both. And then Gito went, no, that's absolutely fine. And then people abused that quite a bit again, which was a bit frustrating. But you had that, there was a speciality with the Gits and stuff, just run them through a few lethal hexes and
Martyr was fun, especially if you had a weak warband. It was a way of compensating for that early kill.
Yes.
Except, of course, you would find situations where you're particularly playing Pete, where you couldn't hit you. And you trying to score Martyr. So you could cycle through the cards.
Like, I don't want to attack you because if I kill one of your guys first, then it's
and then you wouldn't throw it away. You managed to not score it for the entire first turn. You wouldn't throw it away because you're bound to score it early. So only do a second turn. No, still not.
And I'll have strong start, so I couldn't kill anyone, so I couldn't score mine, and then you had that. And so they were the kind of
opposite of each other. So Martin, you had to be the first fighter to die, and strong start, you had to be the first person to kill someone. So you could in some circumstances score simultaneously. Keep chopping, a fun card. Although it was abused horrendously by Thunderx, it shouldn't have been called keep chopping. It should have been called keep shooting. Because you basically had to make 4 attack actions in a round.
I feel like they should have all had to have been range 1.
Yeah, they absolutely
They'd have been range 1 attack actions. That would have been absolutely fine.
Absolutely should. I mean, I even go to say 1 and 2 might have been all right, but
possibly, but
because
at least you've got 3 spears and stuff like
definitely
that.
Not 3. I know one card you hated. Was a spell, I think, was Abasoth's Unmaking.
When they first saw that, I remember we were talking about it, because I was really big into trying to make objectives a thing. And Nightvault really went into hardcore attacking. It was basically who could get the attacks in first.
Chopping.
Who could do, who could
And there were a lot of bonuses, or just as an aside, there were things like Determined Effort and Galvanised cards that gave you multiple extra dice.
So it just basically became a game of just attack your opponent and who could wipe out the other first, or who could get the most kills in first. And then I saw Abasoth's Unmaking. It was just another nail in the objective player's coffin.
Poking Pete's eye.
It really bugged me when that card came out, and it wouldn't always come off, and your opponent wouldn't necessarily always have it if they didn't have a casting warband even.
What did it do? I don't know if we actually said what it did.
It just removed the objective from the table.
It was a spell.
It was a spell.
You've got was it a swirly?
Probably a swirly, I feel it was a swirly.
It destroyed an objective, and you could actually... Didn't Curse Breakers have an objective which was for destroying?
I think they might have done as well. So it's like them
and one for casting a spell. So I feel like you could go. I've got this one for casting a spell. I've got this one for destroying.
And then you were sitting again, and I can't score supremacy again. Didn't like that. Talking of multiple dice rolls as we were, Haymaker was a kind of fun card. I think give you +2 dice, I think, but then you had no defence dice. I think we forgot that on more than one occasion.
Well, I'm sure we did.
More than one occasion where we'd use that, and then we'd go on, and later on they get attacked.
That's how you win these things, isn't it?
Exactly. Just low-grade cheating.
One of my favourite cards, and I noticed it's still a hot card, was Centre of Attention.
Oh, yeah.
And I actually think that's a really well-designed card, because it basically brings everybody within a couple of hexes.
Push everyone within 2 hexes, 1 hex closer.
It was really nice, and there was a really fun time when some stuff had rotated out and they hadn't put in like distraction and my sidestep has always been in. At one point there was lots of push tech. You probably never picked Centre of Attention. And then they rotated like push tech out.
3 or 4, whatever
but
it was.
Centre of Attention was still in. And that was kind of fun because you had to rethink about what you were doing. The shade glass weapons were replaced by nullstone weapons, and they weren't anywhere near as good. I think they realised that they'd OP'd the shade glass.
They were good at targeting casters, but there weren't very many casters. No. So if you knew you were coming up against Stormsire, you maybe would take a few, because, or if you had a really weak warband, you might take 1 or 2 because they just helped your weaker fighters. But they weren't as good as the shade glass.
Quite good, I seem to remember. But and your favourite weapon, which is possibly your favourite weapon of the entire Warhammer Underworlds game, is
the mutating maul.
Yes, I mean you used to play that pretty much every deck.
Almost every deck. It was just a very handy, ubiquitous card that you could just 2 hammers and cleave or knock back. If you had a load of Gits going around, you just had some really weak fighters. Suddenly slapping that on them meant that they were suddenly a bit more concerning, especially if you could get like a Haymaker on there, or a Potion of Rage and a Great Strength and something like that.
Great Strength and a Mutating Maul with an extra dice roll somewhere in there.
Suddenly you're like 3 hammers or 4 hammers and 3 damage.
With cleave.
Yeah, with cleave.
Because nobody ever chose knockback. Very rarely.
And that tied in with other cards like What Armour?
That's the one we're trying to remember earlier.
Which was basically make an attack with cleave, which if you've got cleave, you're probably going to make the attack. So very, very fighty, punching people in the face focused season, Nightvault.
Yes, it kind of objective play almost died.
Yeah, we did, I think, in Nightvault. I think it was gone.
But it would come back
in
another season.
And
we will talk about that in another video.
We will do.
So I hope you've enjoyed our Nightvault retrospective.
Little ramblings.
And do comment below what your fond memories or otherwise of Nightvault. Do let us know, Matt, how much you like Mog. And yeah, thank you for watching.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring that bell to see all our other content. As Robin says, do leave comments on what your favourite fighters, favourite cards, combos, and what your least favourite warband was. It's probably Monarch. And we'll see you soon, maybe in Nightvault, but probably in the Gnarlwood.
Gnarlwood.